Before I start, I need to make it clear that this video is intended for mature audiences. Given the game I'm covering, that should be obvious, but from what I've titled this video, I can't assume everyone watching knows exactly what game this is or its maturity rating. Plus, all my videos up until this point were like PG at worst, so I think this disclaimer is necessary. Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc is rated M for mature. There are M-rated topics in this game, which I will be showing on screen and discussing. With that out of the way, let's start the video. When I started my 8th grade year, I was really into Ace Attorney for a while. I adored playing as this detective lawyer and solving the unique and somewhat absurd murder cases the game threw at me. Later on the same year, I was encouraged to try the Danganronpa series, which I saw compared to Ace Attorney online all the time, with many people praising it. This was the worst decision I've made in my life. I know people tend to say things like that as kind of a joke, and I mean, that was, but not in the same way. When I see someone describe a game like Danganronpa like that, it's usually because they found the game emotionally devastating or it seems too relatable to their own personal struggles, but nonetheless valued the experience greatly. And in a way, I did find the series emotionally devastating, because I've never hated a series so much in my entire life. I'm aware that's kind of a bombshell to drop with how overwhelmingly positive opinions on Danganronpa generally are, but believe me, I can tell you why I feel this way. To start, I'll just be taking a look at the first of the 3 main Danganronpa games today. I'll get to the other 2 eventually, but I feel like I'm gonna need to rest a bit between each of them. So let's begin with Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. Well, to start, the intro was amazing, having an iconic music track and setting up the game's excellent visual style while briefly introducing each of the characters. The game stars Makoto Naegi, an average high school freshman selected as the lucky winner of a contest for entry to Hope's Peak High School. Said school was built specifically for only the most exceptional students, called Ultimates in their particular field. Makoto is not one of them, only allowed to attend due to the aforementioned contest, and is thus dubbed the Ultimate Lucky Student. However, once Makoto enters the gate, the next thing he recalls is waking up alone in a classroom with no idea how he got there. After noting how all the windows were bolted shut and the room was being watched by a camera, he leaves and meets the 14 other students in the entrance hall. They find that the door to the outside of the school is sealed off by a mechanism of unknown origin, and it is revealed that every single window in the school to their knowledge is fully sealed, completely cutting them off from the world. After everyone introduces themselves to each other, an announcement is made telling them to head to the gym, where the students are introduced to their headmaster, a robotic stuffed bear called Monokuma. He apparently runs the school and tells the students that they are never allowed to leave, ever. The rest of their lives will be spent in the school. But he does give them a single way to get out. All they have to do is kill one of their classmates and get away with it. And get away with it means that everyone will be put on a class trial and vote on who they think is guilty at the end. If they choose correctly, that person is executed in front of them. If they choose wrong, then the guilty person gets off free and everyone else is killed instead. The series' premise is one of its best aspects, in my opinion. For the most part, these 15 students are the only characters in the game. Every victim, killer, and person involved in a case will be one of them, and I love that. You'll never know who's going to be the next to die, but it's going to be one of them, maybe even your favorite character, whoever that may be. As the game is told from Makoto's point of view, you get a limited perspective on what these characters are actually like and what they could be hiding from you, although you are able to learn a bit more about them via free time events. If you're familiar with Fire Emblem, these are very similar to those games' support systems, although done better in my opinion. Instead of building up relationships with characters by having them interact with each other, you get to look for and spend time with whoever you want, provided they are available at a given time. And like the support systems, building relationships with characters provides gameplay benefits too, here via equipable skills to be used during trials. I don't think I'm in the minority for saying the trials themselves are the highlights of each game. Obviously, the most interesting part of a murder mystery is going to be piecing together who the culprit is and how they did it, but there's more to it than that. One of, if not my favorite thing about the Danganronpa series is the actual gameplay of the trials. Instead of just listening to arguments and presenting evidence to refute them, the character statements will float across the screen and require players to shoot truth bullets at their weak points. This system starts out easy, but the complexity increases as the game goes on. In addition to adding more options for truth bullets and potential weak points, there's sometimes white noise that blocks the weak spots from being shot, and you'll even have to absorb truth statements to be used against false ones. Sometimes I've gotten frustrated because I know what I have to say, but I don't know the exact way in which the game wants me to say it, though this was pretty infrequent, and I can't really show footage of that since showing anything after the first trial would almost certainly spoil who dies via the X'd out pictures put in their spots. This game is 14 years old at this point, but if you are going to play it, you probably should at the very least do so without knowing what is going to happen. Personally though, I think the minor confusion is more than worth it for how much more interesting the system makes playing Danganronpa. But the non-stop debates aren't the only way the game attempts to spice up the trials. There's Hangman's Gambit, a game where you have to spell out a piece of evidence, and Bullet Time Battle, a one-on-one rhythm game that starts out simple, but soon gets hectic with changing speeds, removing the timing indication, and forcing you to both lock onto statements and manage a limited supply of ammo. The most memorable of the 3 other trial segments is the closing argument, in which the player needs to put together a comic that goes through all of the killer's actions in order. I love the drawings and the way the story is presented, and it's a fantastic way to end off the trials. I'd like to compliment the visual effects and art style of the game as a whole, as I think both are great and best exemplified through these minigame sections. The music is solid too. It's not a very large soundtrack, or at the very least a lot of the main songs are repeated, but they're good. Everything I've talked about so far is great, and should make Danganronpa an extremely unique and memorable game that is well worth playing. But the last of those is not entirely accurate. Let's get into the bad stuff now. If you ask me what the number one thing I hate about this series is, I would without hesitation say it's the characters. The number I dislike is far greater than the number I like, and my god do they refuse to shut up. However, Trigger Happy Havoc's cast is easily my favorite of the trilogy. It's borderline passable actually, and I can tolerate most of the characters in the game. Out of the 15 main students, there's 6 I like, 2 of which I really like, 7 I don't really care for, and 2 I actively hate. Funnily enough, the characters who lasted the longest in the game tended to be on the extremes or right in the middle, with both my favorite and least favorite characters being there for almost the entire time. I won't be mentioning who those are or talking about specific characters yet to keep this part of the video spoiler free. Of course, my issue with the cast is likely due to how the characters are written rather than their personalities on their own. I think the overall story and sequence of the game, for the first 5 chapters, is written fairly well aside from one thing. There aren't any plot holes I noticed, and pretty much every question you have should be answered at some point. The one thing that's a problem is that the game really drags sometimes. I'd say you could cut out almost half of the dialogue outside of the trials and nothing of substance will be lost. And later on they keep repeating the same flashbacks over and over for some reason. I don't need to see this image a dozen times, okay game? The best example of poor pacing I can think of is near the start of the game, where you have to hear how every character's initial investigation of the school went, even though doing so adds nothing that couldn't have simply been explained in a couple of text boxes. This part also takes advantage of maybe the most questionable mechanic in the game, these reaction events where you can lock onto a specific part of what someone says to get more info on it. These show up all the time and don't add anything to the game from what I can tell. They just cause Makoto to ask painfully obvious questions he would normally have asked anyway, and are put right in front of you in bright purple bracketed text. I don't know if you could use this system well in some way, but this game definitely doesn't at any point. Speaking of questionable mechanics, you can lose in the class trials. Why is that questionable, you may ask, since the whole point of a game is the fact that there are stakes after all, right? Well, losing all your health, or influence as the game calls it, does basically nothing. You have to repeat the current phase of the trial you're on. That's it. Just the single thing you were doing at the time. Aside from the closing arguments, this barely ever matters because it's not like there's really any progress to lose in the minigames. Basically, at worst, you'll have to play 30 to 45 seconds over again. Given the fact that the game already encourages you not to mess up and to get through the trials as fast as possible by giving you a score and an amount of mono coins based on it, having a health bar feels pointless. But, I mean, I guess it is preferable to having to play entire chunks of the trial over again that you already know how to get through, though even then you could just save scum anyway. To get back to the game's writing, let's talk about how Danganronpa handles humor. There are a lot of attempts at jokes in the game, but most of them fall flat for me. To be fair, I ended up laughing at a lot more than I was expecting to. Hifumi screaming and crying about how Kyoko is going to kill him while she's just standing there like this, that was pretty funny. Taka going through his identity crisis was really good too. He starts trying and failing to swear at every opportunity he has, and saying he has no idea who the fudge Taka is. The best part for me is that his response in regards to his name is always "I'm me," with no further elaboration. And this is probably the funniest joke in the entire series in context. I'd also like to give Byakuya the award for the funniest Danganronpa character. I cracked a smile almost every time he opened his mouth, either from what he was saying or just how the line was delivered.
No, I am not effing with you right now. I'm telling you the truth. That was awfully specific. Please tell me you have a reason for saying all of that. You have only yourself to blame. You came to me with your tragic little story. I didn't ask you to.
Besides those things, I can't really think of anything I found to be funny, maybe due to my apathy towards a majority of the cast. When these things are said by characters I like, then I'm more inclined to laugh since I enjoy the person saying them regardless of whether they're being funny or not. Likewise, when a character I'm not the biggest fan of delays moving the plot forward for quote-unquote comedic purposes, it really makes me groan. Also, I'd like to note that Steam lists this game as a dark comedy, which I strongly disagree with because of how little of the attempted jokes can be considered dark. Most of it is characters being dumb, stupid references, or sexual jokes. Although the end of the game's second execution might be one of my favorite examples of black comedy ever, and if you've played the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sorry to spend so much time talking about the game's humor, and, well, I'm not done yet, because I do want to make it clear this is another one of the biggest complaints I have about the series. Not necessarily that I don't find the games funny, but more so the tonal problems created by me not finding them funny. Danganronpa's premise is extremely dark, and something that would usually be taken with complete seriousness. Trying to make the game funny despite that is not a problem, but trying to balance both humorous and emotional moments can be difficult, and I don't think it's done well here. There were moments in which I was really starting to feel for some of the characters, only to stop having any emotional connection to the game once they made a stupid unfunny joke in the middle of it. I still love Ace Attorney just as much, if not more than I did 4 years ago, and balancing comedy and seriousness is something the series does near perfectly. When there's a dramatic reveal, it's taken seriously and it usually plays out without being interrupted by jokes, allowing you to take those moments completely seriously. Ace Attorney is also just way funnier than Danganronpa. The last thing I'd like to talk about before getting into spoilers is Monokuma, the face of the series, which is fitting because he's basically the perfect encapsulation of everything I hate about the series. I find this character to be insufferable. He's constantly making jokes and getting on the nerves of every other character in the game. I don't know, I've always hated all powerful type characters that act like this. Do I even have to say this character isn't funny? Him randomly detonating at the start of the game was pretty good, and he was funny, if I'm being generous, maybe once per chapter. Actually, there's one more thing I want to say. The Steam reviews for this game are hilarious. Here are my personal favorites. I'm starting to think the school might not be great, and the bear might be kinda mean. This happened to my buddy Eric the other day. Nice bear, would totally trust. I'm not reading that one. No! I want Mondo to spit in my mouth. So every time Makoto refutes a statement, he'll say, "No, that's wrong!" This guy apparently really liked that saying, so much that I decided to play the game for over 3,000 hours. Why'd the funny bear do that to the anime people? Full of sexism and anti-LGBT opinions. Girlfriend made me play through all 40 hours of this game and then cheated on me. I want Celeste to curb stomp me and hold me and tell me everything's gonna be alright. Left ear, Danganronpa soundtrack. Right ear, Byakuya Togami voice lines times 2 speed. Do this for an hour before bed every day and you will become a successful CEO. Kyoko. I am literally Kyoko Kirigiri. Hey, that's my review. Finally, my personal favorite. Warning, if you buy this game, it will install Danganronpa on your computer. I cannot thank this person enough for their service. Think of how many lives are saved by their kindness. Okay, I think that's it for the spoiler-free stuff. If you haven't played the game before but have any want to, I'd recommend skipping to this timestamp to hear my conclusion, then deciding whether or not to play the game. Again, the best way to play this is to go in blind, and if any part of it sounds interesting to you, you should try to keep spoiler-free. One of the ways in which Trigger Happy Havoc excels in comparison to the games that would follow it is its lack of a formula. Every case in the game is completely different in terms of the number or state of the killers and victims. Case 1 is one killer, their victim, and who is then known as Junko being killed for breaking the school regulations. Case 2 is the most standard, one killer, one victim. Case 3 had a killer who was then killed by someone else, and Case 4 was a suicide. Case 5 was a complete setup from the mastermind to get rid of Kyoko, and Case 6 had no killer or victim and was instead about solving all the mysteries of the school. These key differences between every trial helped alleviate some of the game's tedium. Unfortunately, the later entries wouldn't throw as many curveballs into the formula for whatever reason. There is a problem with this specific case lineup though. After discovering Sakura's body in the 4th chapter, none of the main students die after that, which is a bit less than half of the game. The problem is that as a whole, I'm not exactly head over heels for the 6 survivors. Like I said, my 2 favorite characters survived, but so did my 2 least favorite. And I'd just like to know, who did this? Who is responsible for this? Whoever made this character should be banned from working on video games, at least for a little while. Toko is awful, and the worst character in the game. Maybe. She spends the whole game complaining and wrongfully accusing people of things. At least when she's not obsessing over Byakuya, whom she refers to as Master, despite his strong dislike for her and constant verbal abuse. Besides some honestly kind of hilarious lines from Byakuya directed at her, there was not a single point in the game in which I felt Toko added anything. She wasn't funny, nor did she ever move things along on her own. You could almost take her out of the game and nothing would change, if it weren't for her split personality, Genocide Jack, or Genocide Jill, I guess. I don't know why the game did that. We'll just go with Jill because that's how the game represents her. Genocide Jill is a known serial killer who you're trapped inside the school with, and also happens to be hopelessly obsessed with Byakuya. She's a complete psychopath who only kills who she perceives as cute boys in incredibly gruesome ways. She states she had intentions to eventually kill Byakuya, which I honestly kinda liked. Him having to worry about a psycho-stalker added necessary karma to his character for how he acted and treated others, in addition to the entertainment provided by his reactions to her. But aside from that, I found Genocide Jill pretty annoying. I vastly prefer her to Toko, but that's really not saying much, is it? The other worst character is Hina, who is incredibly boring and stupid. I didn't find anything about her character interesting in the slightest, but unlike Toko, she did contribute to the cases, by consistently leading the others in the wrong direction. She refuses to listen to reason at the start of Trials 3 and 6, and Trial 4, her biggest role of them all. She knows Sakura decided to kill herself, which hurts her deeply due to how close they were. Understandable. But she then makes a decision to change the crime scene to make it look like she did it, and tries to lead everyone to a false conclusion to get everyone killed, because once Sakura was revealed as a traitor working with the mastermind, Hiro, Toko, and Byakuya resented her and refused to even go near her. Hina believes that this tension caused Sakura so much stress and sadness that it drove her to suicide, and thinks they all deserve punishment for that. That I'm okay with. The fourth trial is the best in the game, partially because of her interference. But the game almost acts like this was a justifiable decision for her to make. Wanting to get back at the three who she thought made Sakura kill herself? Sure, but killing everyone, including Makoto and Kyoko, who still respected and trusted Sakura to a degree? That's insane. And guess what? It's revealed that of course that's not at all what Sakura wanted to happen. Once Monokuma reveals Sakura's suicide note, it turns out she was being forced to kill someone by Monokuma or else he would destroy her family's dojo that had been passed down for hundreds of years. She then decides to make her victim herself, to protect the dojo as well as the other remaining students, who despite everything she truly considered her friends until the end. Man, Sakura was a great character. She deserved better. It's sad that these three survived and she didn't. Okay, I don't hate Hiro or even necessarily dislike him. In fact, I thought he was alright for most of the game. He was just as stupid as Hina, if not stupider, but the game tended to treat him like an idiot, and most of the characters outright ignored much of what he had to say. Plus, some of his lines were actually pretty funny. Then they stopped ignoring him, and we had to spend 15 minutes convincing him that Kyoko, who is standing right in front of him, is not a ghost, before continuing with the class trial. After that, I found him to be fairly annoying, and my opinion on him dropped a bit. Makoto actually had the opposite effect on me. I found him pretty uninteresting for most of the game, though his unrelenting optimism was pretty nice. But starting at Chapter 5, he really started to become his own character, and eventually was the very person keeping everyone together. In a few ways, he reminded me of Zidane from Final Fantasy IX, the main character, but not the one the story's focus is on, though I still like Zidane a lot more than Makoto. Since I've been going through the survivors from worst to best, next would be Byakuya, my second favorite character in the game. Byakuya is the sole heir to a multi-billion-dollar company who looks down on commoners that are not part of the 1%, thinking their lives have no meaning. He serves as this game's rival character, someone who antagonizes the rest of the cast throughout the game despite being on their side, and I'd argue he's the best in the series at doing that specifically. Nearly every interaction he has with the other characters outside of Trials involves him insulting them in some way, and as I said before, it's really funny, especially his reactions to the garbage that comes out of Toko's mouth. This is how he starts out. And then you get to Chapter 2, in which he sees the killer and victim before anyone else, and decides to desecrate the dead body and rearrange the crime scene to make it look like Toko did it. You may wonder why he did this, since Toko being found guilty would cause him to die too. What does he gain from that? He uses it as an excuse to out Toko as Genocide Jack, and wanted to see who would stand in his way in case he actually did carry through with the murder. Byakuya goes from a simple snob to someone who can be genuinely evil, and I love that at no point does the game ever try to make him sympathetic. Trust me, that will be of note for the other Danganronpa games. Despite how he acts, Byakuya also seems to have an incredibly fragile ego and can't handle people thinking they're better than him. I really like at the start of the third case where Makoto says he figured something out, and then Byakuya immediately claims he also figured it out. When everyone asks him what it is, he immediately deflects the question back to Makoto. And when you disprove what he thought happened in the fourth case, and he gets furious about how he may have fallen into Hina's trap, man is it satisfying to see him put in his place. Byakuya improved a bit as a person after that point, putting more trust in others and leading the group himself at certain points, though he ended up being less interesting to me as a result. It was done well, though, with him attempting to deny he's changed, and as a whole, he's an incredibly entertaining character that single-handedly improved my enjoyment of the game. And that just leaves Kyoko, who is easily my favorite character in the series. She initially comes off as an unemotional person who doesn't care about others at all, but in reality, she's quite the opposite. At the end of the first trial, she goes out of her way to comfort Makoto when he believes Sayaka didn't care about him at all, and later criticizes Byakuya's lack of empathy for others. She also confides in Makoto that she does feel emotions, and just hides them to the best of her ability so as to not cloud her judgment, which allows her to act as someone who's collected and able to move things forward in tense situations. And I'm not gonna lie and say coolness factor isn't one of the main reasons I like Kyoko so much. She carries the rest of the cast through the trials and becomes such a threat to the game's mastermind that the entire fifth case was fabricated specifically to make everyone vote her guilty and kill her off. Also, her design is amazing and probably my favorite in the entire series. I definitely don't think she's a perfect character. She suffers from the game just not being written that well, with some of her lines really feeling out of place. And if you don't like Kyoko that much, I can see how the focus the game puts on her in comparison to the other characters can be irritating. I mean, about a quarter of the game's final chapter is basically a Kyoko lore dump that explains about every question you could possibly have about her. It definitely could have been done better, but I thought everything revealed was genuinely interesting and added to her already great character. Kyoko ends up as basically the main character of the game. The plot revolves around her, not Makoto. I think Makoto being the protagonist is still the right choice though. I like Kyoko's mysterious nature and how some of her actions seem obtuse or out of character until more gets revealed, both of which would be lost by having her thoughts read to the player. I'm gonna stop here because I don't want to turn this into a whole character analysis. I have plans to make a character ranking when I'm done with these reviews, and if that does happen, I'll make sure to go into full detail then. I don't feel it's necessary to specifically talk about any of the other characters, especially since none of them are there for more than 50% of the game, but here's an ordered tier list if you want my opinion on one of them specifically. Or just ask in the comments for details on someone, I'll probably reply. The last thing to talk about is, fittingly, the final chapter. Yeah, let's start with the good stuff. The investigation begins by allowing you to enter any previously inaccessible room in the academy. Finally finding out the purposes of some of these places is intriguing and makes this probably my favorite investigation phase in the series. Previous ones felt a bit slow, especially since I already knew what happened, but this one managed to keep me interested the entire time. Despite not being a murder, the stakes are still high as Monokuma challenges you to solve all the school's mysteries for the trial or else everyone dies. And that's about it for the good stuff, unfortunately. Let's talk about those mysteries you were required to solve. The real identity of the mastermind is Junko Enoshima, who did not die from this. That was actually her twin sister, Mukuro Ikosaba, the 16th student, lying hidden somewhere in the school. The one they call the Ultimate Despair. Watch out for her. Junko being the villain is underwhelming. Junko as a villain is also underwhelming. Her motive for creating this killing game and broadcasting it to the entire world is that she likes people being in despair. That's really lame. An entire group of people trying to ruin the world because they were born that way is really lame. During the trial, Junko switches between 7 or so different personalities, some of which are kind of fun at first, but quickly get old when she's doing 90% of the talking from that point onward. I still kinda like the Queen one though, she should have stuck with that one the whole time. As for the other reveals, they're at best acceptable. I like the memory wipe stuff for the most part. Finding out everyone was actually friends before the killing game and they shut themselves in the school was actually a really good twist. Except they decide not to explain how Junko managed to wipe the memories of 14 people for specifically only the last 2 years. She just says, that doesn't really matter, does it? And it's never brought up again. The same thing happens with the fact that Junko and Mukuro have different last names even though they're twins. Oh, the explanation's not interesting or relevant. Why even make them twins at that point? Then there's the biggest, most awful, most tragic event in human history. It's not. They leave it very ambiguous in the game what the tragedy is, going more into it in 2, so I'll just say, the fact that this somehow is the thing that plunged the world into mass crime and hysteria is the most unrealistic thing in the entire game, by far. Which wouldn't be a problem for me, I usually love stupid stuff like that, but the game really wants me to take it seriously, and I just can't. The last part of the chapter involves the characters losing their will to escape after finding out the world was effectively destroyed, having to be motivated by Makoto to keep going. It's a pretty good way to end things, but my god, someone needs to get these kids a thesaurus. You may pick up on the game using the words hope and despair throughout more than you'd expect, and this all culminates in one final battle between hope and despair, and wow is it cliché. It's so weird to me that the game tries really hard to be mature and thought-provoking, only to end with, the power of friendship will overcome all.
You came here to bring down the ultimate despair. You came here to confront despair without ever giving up. And if that's true, I think we could call you the ultimate hope. What do you think?
The message is fine. What I can't deal with is how frequently Danganronpa shoves the words hope and despair in your face as if they're the only words to describe how the characters feel. Now every time I see the word despair, I have a mini mental breakdown as I am once again reminded of the series I feel an intense loathing towards. Danganronpa has done irreversible damage to my psyche and I will blame it for any mental issues I develop in the future. Anyway, Junko dies and everyone leaves the school. The game ends ambiguously by bathing the characters in a bright light and not showing what's outside. I don't really care. Yeah, it sucks not to get confirmation on what the outside world is like, but the last 30 minutes were all about having to face uncertainties to move forward. Ending it like this makes sense and I can live with it. I need to lie down. Maybe just get comfortable and watch a nice show. Ah! Danganronpa the animation is something that exists. You may think it has no reason to exist, but I do like the attempt to condense the 25-hour game that shouldn't have been that long into something significantly shorter. 13 episodes might be a little too short though, totaling to less than 5 hours. It definitely feels a little rushed, but I think the pacing is better overall compared to the game. The biggest problem I had with the show was the characters. They actually did improve some of the worst characters here. Monokuma's voice is less annoying and he's generally funnier, same with Genocide Jill, and Hina wasn't a complete moron. They removed the iconic "it's standing up" scene, but what they replaced it with is way better. Monokuma mocking Sayaka's crying caught me so off guard and was the hardest I've ever laughed at anything in this franchise. Toko still sucks though. What really upsets me is that every character I liked in the game is significantly worse here, with the exception of Sakura. Byakuya barely insults anyone and his delivery is a lot weaker. Not to insult the voice actor or anything, I think his voice is fine for the role, and delivering an English line to fit the Japanese animation is probably tough. Yes, I watched the dub because I'm not a weeb. Byakuya's still a decent character, he just isn't nearly as good as he is in the game. The same can't be said about Kyoko, the worst character in the show. Or at least the most degraded. They gave her a much more generic, aloof personality. She's way colder to others and they decided to drop the idea of her being overly emotional but wanting to hide it. I specifically commented on how much I liked her seeming like this at first and then turning out to be so much more. In the show, that's all she is. Still, if that was the only change they made, Kyoko would still be one of the better characters in the show. But then she just decides to throw Makoto under the bus and sacrifice him at the end of the 5th trial to save herself. In the game, yeah, she causes Makoto to be found guilty, but it's completely by accident. She casts doubt on his alibi only when the others are convinced she is the only suspect, in an effort to buy more time to figure out exactly what's going on. Kyoko clearly doesn't want to vote Makoto guilty. Look at how she reacts to the trial ending.
What do you mean time's up? There's no time's up. Since when have we—
This was a turning point for her character, with her feeling immense guilt over her pride almost causing the death of someone she cared about. Moving on, the investigations are just montages here, and the trials are much faster and much less suspenseful. The dead body discoveries are done better though, since for some reason in the games they like to warn you that you're about to discover a body, taking away from the surprise. I have to agree with public opinion that playing Trigger Happy Havoc is significantly superior to watching the anime adaptation. It may be more drawn out, but the actual content is better. And that's my review of Danganronpa, Trigger Happy Havoc. You may think hating the game is unjustified since I did manage to find a lot of stuff here I liked, and I agree. I was honestly pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed Trigger Happy Havoc. Don't get the wrong idea, I wouldn't quite consider it good. Chapter 6 made that very clear to me. I think respectable is a good word to sum up my opinion on the game. There are tons of great ideas here, a few of which are implemented very well, but the vast majority are executed poorly or resolved in uninteresting ways. The cast is a huge mixed bag, and the tonal inconsistencies and pacing problems only became greater as the game went on. But the gameplay is good, the cases are pretty solid as a whole, and if nothing else, it truly is a memorable experience. Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc is okay. If the game sounds interesting and you're able to go in mostly blind, I'd honestly recommend it. Despite my criticisms, I generally do enjoy and appreciate it in general. I know I've titled this The Series That Broke My Sanity, but that was truthfully never really the fault of this game. Very little of the hate I have for this series was ever caused by its first entry. And, well, we'll get into that next time when I talk about Danganronpa 2. Oh god, it's just setting in now that I have to actually play the other games. I regret starting this. This is the worst idea I've ever had for a video series. What was I thinking?